Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here today and be part of this really great event. My name is Ian Crosby. I'm Field CTO at Aptum. We are a trusted Octopus partner, but today I'm not going to be talking about Octopus Deploy. I'm going to be talking about hybrid clouds, and specifically why I think more people should be talking about hybrid cloud. What are some of the challenges with it, and what are some of the patterns that I've seen for having success in a hybrid cloud architecture? So, talking about hybrids, I think what's interesting is that hybrids weren't actually meant to be an end solution, right? When hybrids came onto the market, it was about being an intermediary step because going from traditional gasoline powered car to a 100% electric vehicle is a very big shift, right? That's a big cultural jump. That's a big practical move. There's a lot of infrastructure involved. So by introducing hybrids, it made that transition a whole lot easier. And when you think about it, hybrids kind of have the best of both worlds, right? I get that fuel efficiency that I'm really looking for. So I'm not paying as much. I've got less of a carbon footprint, but I've still got that reliability in behind. But I know that I'm not going to be worried trying to find a charging station or stuck with a dead battery somewhere because I've still got that gasoline powered engine that's behind. However, there's obviously some difficulties that come with hybrids as well, right? Essentially, you've got two cars smushed into one. That is a whole lot of complexity, a whole lot of components, a whole lot of room for failure. And if I need somebody to work on this, I'm trying to find a mechanic. Well, it's not everybody who's going to have that knowledge to be able to work on this hybrid vehicle. Now, I'm not going to sit here and talk about cars for 30 minutes. This is a conference about ships, not cars. But I really like that analogy actually goes pretty far when we're thinking about hybrid clouds. Because in a very similar vein, hybrid was never meant to be the goal. Nobody came out and said that hybrid cloud should be the utopian that we're searching for. Anybody who's been in the industry as long as I have remembers the day when everything was on premises. And it was very painful and slow to try and get new hardware. We'd have to request out to a different team. They'd have to go and get physical boxes, and rack and stack them, and provision. It was a very long and tedious process we had to go through. And when you got that first experience of the public cloud and what was possible, it really opened up a lot of amazing options, right? I could just go from, again, trying to wait 6 to 18 months maybe to get a server to using my command line to just having infrastructure up in a matter of seconds. And this spurned a whole wave of innovation, right? Startups who no longer had to have a huge infrastructure budget to go and buy a bunch of hardware and servers. All they needed was an AWS account and often got a bunch of free credits and could immediately test out their idea, find product market fit. And this kind of wave of innovation led some of the traditional enterprise companies to feel a little bit left out and want some of that, positive cloud juice. And from there, we saw kind of echoing from the mouths of every single CIO, a strategy somewhere around the lines of cloud first. And cloud first often not really just meant to run to the cloud as quickly as possible at all costs. And obviously that came with a lot of challenges and didn't really work out in many cases. Right, the promises that we thought we were getting with cloud, right? This infinitely scalable computer. It was meant to be cost effective, right? I'm only getting paid by the minute, paid per use. So there's no waste. It should be more sustainable. These things should be secure because AWS, Google, Azure, they've got the best security engineers in the world that are working there. And they're meant to be reliable, right? I've got all the nines. Essentially, we were promised sunshine and rainbows, and what most people actually got was a lot of sleepless nights and angry CFOs. Because we thought we were getting when we were adopting cloud wasn't what actually came to pass. And this is what I've seen in talking with customers over the past couple of years, really, is this idea of cloud disillusionment. Okay, we've got there, we've done this, lift and shift, we moved everything to the cloud, but we're not just seeing the payoffs that we thought we were going to get. Cost overruns are constant because the cloud is built for consumption. So it's easy to consume. So that's what people do. That's what teams do. And that just means that the costs just become overwhelming. And there's lots of security concerns because, yes, they've got wonderful security teams, but the complexity of these cloud environments make it really easy to shoot yourself in the foot. And this complexity just continues to grow. And it's a challenge that people face, which has kind of led to this idea of maybe the cloud wasn't the way that we needed to go, right? Or maybe we needn't go all in on the cloud. And people are starting to temper back a little bit and looking at, hey, maybe there's a mix of the two. And this starts to look like hybrid cloud. I see really three paths in which folks end up in a hybrid scenario. The first is where there's a hard requirement. And this means, I've got regulatory compliance. By some kind of contract, I'm bound to maybe run my data or my applications within infrastructure that I physically own. I'll put this in air quotes because these requirements aren't always written on paper. Sometimes it's just maybe the whim of the current CIO or CTO. But whatever the case, there are valid reasons where, some of my workloads, I just have to run these on premises in my own data centers or my own infrastructure. But, I still want to be able to leverage all the promises of cloud. I still want to run these burstable workloads or leverage managed databases, leverage serverless architectures. So I end up with a hybrid cloud infrastructure in that sense. The second path is the partial or sometimes never-ending migration. Speaking with a client recently who was on year 6 of their 3-year cloud migration. And this is not often an uncommon story. Folks kind of head down this path of, we're going to migrate everything to the cloud, only to find out that it's not always feasible. And other priorities get in the way, and you kind of get stuck in this hybrid scenario by accident. But this isn't always unintentional, right? If you think about these 6 R's of cloud migration, one of those R's is retain. And it's a very important category. It means, like, when I'm looking at my workloads, which of these does it make sense to actually keep on premise? It's not worth that return of investment of taking the work and modernizing it and moving it to public cloud, but I'm going to leave it there. And again, that's where I end up in a hybrid cloud scenario. And the third path here is folks who are generally a little bit more mature, a little bit more advanced, and they're actually looking at optimizing their workloads. They've kind of realized that the public cloud doesn't make sense for everything. And especially from a cost perspective, do I really need to run everything there? We've seen a lot of noise around the idea of even repatriation, right? So moving things back from public cloud to on-premise. And while sometimes this is about maybe latency or, again, governance requirements, 90% of the time it's about cost. If I have workloads that are fairly stable, fairly predictable, I'm going to be able to run that a whole lot cheaper on premises than I can in public cloud. So this gives us a lot of roads that lead to a hybrid cloud world. And, similar to the hybrid vehicles, it can kind of look like maybe that gives you the best of both worlds, right? And I can have my stable, traditional on-premise infrastructure where I run my core workloads. And I know I'm not going to get surprised at the end of the month with a bill for that. I can predict how much that's going to cost. And then when I'm doing my experimenting or there's a lot more unknowns, I can leverage a public cloud to run these burstable workloads, to leverage these higher order services, have a serverless architecture. And this feels like a reasonable idea on paper. But as you probably noticed from the title of this talk, I'm not here to talk about the positives of hybrid cloud. And the reality is that there is a reason that hybrid cloud wasn't a pitched utopian architecture, right? It comes with a lot of challenges. And center to all that is really about complexity. Because obviously you are at least doubling the complexity that's within your architecture, right? You are now managing 2 completely different environments with different needs, different requirements, different skill sets, different tools. That becomes a whole lot of cognitive load to put on your teams and your people. And out of that, you see the tool fragmentation. Generally, you have your traditional tools that you've been using for your on-premise infrastructure, but you don't want to go take that and leverage the same tooling if you're going to launch a brand new cloud native initiative in public cloud, right? Like that's like buying a brand new Ferrari and then just keeping it in the garage. So you want to leverage those brand new tools that are out there. But this obviously comes at a cost because you're going to have to manage, operate, and solve for both. And this leads to a skill set gaps. Are you going to expect your teams to be able to understand, manage, and operate both on-premise and public cloud environments? Or are you going to split them up and have two different teams, one responsible for on-premise, one responsible for public cloud? They're probably going to be siloed. Neither of those is an ideal situation. And it really comes down to just a whole lot of operational overhead because there are more requirements, more things to manage. It's a much more complex environment. So I want to touch on some of the patterns, some of the strategies I've seen to have a little bit smoother, a little bit more success in a hybrid environment. And first of all, it's really about understanding your specific constraints. As I laid out earlier, there are different paths that get you to hybrid cloud. So there is no one solution that fits all. You need to understand what are your specific needs and your specific constraints. But one pattern that I've seen very successful is modernization. And specifically, this is the case where if maybe you have government regulatory reasons that you're running on premises, or maybe it's for cost. Just because you need to run certain workloads on premises doesn't mean that they can't be modern. Right? All of the advances that we've seen around cloud native tooling explosion in the past number of years means that I can have a fully cloud native modern environment running in my own data centers. It's not a problem. So if I go and modernize the workloads that I do have on premise, that makes it a whole lot easier to manage the different environments because I'm looking at a lot more parity between the two. A simple example is leveraging containers where that's possible. Right? If you have the same kind of deployable units for your applications, whether it's on premises, whether it's in public cloud, it makes the tooling, it makes the processes, everything else a whole lot simpler. The second pattern, as I talk about it, is about unified tooling. Ideally, again, you want to minimize the complexity and do that by having common tooling across both. Obviously, this is not always possible. Traditionally, we've got these what we call legacy tooling to manage our on-premises or more legacy applications. And then we've got this set of modern cloud native stuff, which tries to pretend that legacy doesn't exist. But we're seeing more and more that the need to manage these two environments is pushing tool builders, pushing product owners to build these features in. So an example of a client I was working with recently had one of the very common setups, right? Your modern stuff is written all containerized, but they still have to deal with a bunch of virtual machines. Well, with projects like KubeVirt, for example, you can still do all of that within a Kubernetes cluster. And if you want something a little bit more enterprise, Red Hat OpenShift, it's got the same functionality built upon the same tools. So you can have a single platform managing both your containers and your virtual machines. Another common challenge is around Windows environments. And there again, you can leverage tools like Windows containers. They're not ideal. You don't get the same benefits you're going to get out of most containers, but you do have that uniform building blocks to allow you to get benefits. The third pattern is around abstraction layers. And you've probably heard a lot talked about platform engineering. And this is really what it's about here. It's saying, we know we've got a lot of complexity in the setup, but let's put that complexity somewhere intentional, shift it away from our developers, let them focus on building features, adding product value. And we're going to sit that complexity within a platform engineering team who's going to build abstraction layers on top to, again, allow those developers to go and iterate quickly, have that managed within a specific team. And the final pattern is around observability. And this is something that I just continuously see companies under investing in, right? Having proper, not just observability tooling, but processes and patterns to really understand your environments. And ideally, in a hybrid environment, you want that uniform single pane of glass. So, for example, us internally, we're currently launching a project, going through a project where we're trying to uniform one of our more modern products where we manage public cloud platforms, and another product, sorry, where we manage traditional infrastructure. And they've always used very different observability toolings, observability platforms. And we're trying to investigate, can we find a unified platform that monitors both, really, to avoid a lot of the duplicate work and to remove some of that complexity that exists. So if we talk about deployments and what that looks like in hybrid cloud environments, and again, some of the challenges and some of the strategies that I've seen work. And the first one, and I can't believe still saying this in the year of ChatGPT 2024, but automation is really key. I was recently working with a company, and they wanted us to look at their deployment process. Where they were deploying not just applications, but they deployed entire environments for their clients. And part of that environment was a very modern microservices, all containerized, all deployed on Kubernetes. Infrastructure as code. It was very automated. It was very sleek and modern and quick. But the other side they had was still some Windows virtual machines. And there was a very strong dependency between the two. So no matter how quick and how efficient they could deploy and get these modern microservices deployed, it still depended on how slow these Windows virtual machines were to deploy. And that was still a very manual process to deploy, provision. It was done through manual actions by different members of the team. So that was really the first thing that could get a really big win there of just building in that automation. And often we invest a lot of our efforts in that more modern, exciting side, but we need to invest the same amount of effort into our traditional legacy applications and legacy processes because odds are they're going to be there for a long time. So really need to invest in having that automation that allows you to build on top. The second strategy is around release coordination. So this is something I see more in hybrid environments where we've got different dependencies we had to manage, like I mentioned, potentially between modern cloud native microservices and maybe traditional virtual machines, but also versioning, right? If I have to deploy to a public cloud, maybe a SaaS environment, and I'm also deploying on premise, maybe I'm deploying to customers. As soon as I need to start keeping track of versions, this becomes really, really challenging. And I've seen at a number of different companies where they're kind of keeping track of which versions are deployed where, or which applications have dependencies on which versions of other applications in an actual single text file or YAML file. And I'm just hoping that that's at least stored in Git. But there are much better solutions for that. And this is one area where I do need to call out. I feel like Octopus Deploy does a great job of handling this. There are other tools, but it's really important to solve this in an intelligent way because in a hybrid cloud situation, these complexities are just going to proliferate. Which leads to the third point is really invest in the tooling. Understand what are your needs, what are your requirements, and find a tooling that fits that. As I said, even the modern cloud native tools are starting to adapt and understand that they also need to solve the use cases of the more legacy world. So maybe you looked a couple of years ago, but it's worth looking again. A lot of tooling are really trying to solve both. So make sure that you find one that fits. And finally, once you do have a strong deployment process in place, you have automated deployment pipelines, you can really use the CI/CD as an enabler in your hybrid strategy, right? When we get into the situation where we're looking at right clouds, right workloads, well, if you have a CI/CD pipeline that's truly automated and you have proper metrics around it, then you can start running experiments. What does it look like to deploy this workload on premise instead of in public cloud? Do I save money? Do I lose out on reliability? That's where you really get to tweak and optimize and get to an ideal hybrid cloud situation. So wrapping things up, hybrid cloud is not the hero we deserve, but it's the hero we need right now. And for better or worse, this is what most of us are going to be working with for the foreseeable future. So it's really important to strike that balance, right? Be intentional about what do we want to run in public cloud and what makes sense to run on-premise. And we're trying to tackle the challenges that are there. It's all about the complexity. Try to move complexity away as much as you can, because just by having a hybrid environment, we've already introduced a lot. So commonalities where you can, across your tooling, across your processes, look for single panes of glass. And again, shift that away from the development teams. Try and centralize that within abstraction layers, within a platform engineering team when possible. And finally, it's about optimization, right? Just as hybrid cloud is not an end state, it's not a final state whatsoever. It's going to continuously be evolving as your workloads change, as needs change, as infrastructure changes. So ensure that you're measuring, you're understanding the state of your environment, and able to optimize as the situation changes. That's all I had for today. Thanks so much. Again, my name is Ian Crosby, Field CTO at Apton. Would love to answer any questions. Please reach out if you've got anything to say, any challenges that you have around hybrid cloud. Thank you very much.